Welcome to A Cult of Personality, esoteric podcast extraordinaire. I'm Greg Kaminsky, and your co-host is Billy Hepper. Now, in episode number 221, we have a very special interview for you. Chuck Dunning Jr. returns to the show to discuss his excellent new book, A Croix Oratory, Rosicrucian Reflections and Resources from a Night of the Eagle and Pelican. Having written the foreword to this book myself, I can tell you that it is very, very special, and this conversation with Brother Chuck reflects the beauty and sublimity of his book. Just to quote from the foreword a little bit, I cannot actually imagine a better gathering of author and subject than Chuck Dunning and Masonic Rosicrucianism. Since the time I met him, Chuck has demonstrated the accomplishment of virtue, the embodiment of fraternalism and love for humanity, a keen intellect, and devotion to and knowledge of the traditions of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism beyond probably anyone I know. For him to author this text and share it with us is a tremendous blessing. He honors the origins of the Rosicrucian tradition, its philosophy, the teachings on spirituality and metaphysics, alchemy, magic, and its integration with Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Even his insights into the creation of a Christian Cabala that borrowed from the Jewish tradition, a thorny issue at best, is mature, well-considered, and kind. Finally, Brother Chuck graces us with his words about service and, most importantly, love as the basis and result of this spiritual path. It would be accurate to say that while reading this book, I was moved between respect for the impeccable communication of knowledge and feelings of heartfelt emotion when encountering sublime poetry and the underlying intentions beneath the words. Chuck Dunning is a true and worthy guide. This book is an authentic presentation of the Rosicrucian philosophy from its inception in the 17th century to its modern expressions. The inclusion of his personal experiences, reflections, insights, and devotional verses, along with the sublime symbolic artwork, ensures that this book is one that you can depend on as you traverse the path. It is accurate, well-considered, intentionally crafted to aid you on your journey, and if you follow its teachings as methods to practice, you will not go astray. Again, that's just a brief excerpt from the foreword that I wrote to Chuck's book in praise of it. And from start to finish, this whole interview is lit. Chuck Dunning Jr. is one of our favorite guests, and this interview demonstrates why. Embodying the spirit and understanding of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry through living its teachings and communicating that to others is just one of the ways that Brother Dunning teaches us the way. His new book is absolutely crucial reading for anyone who is even interested in the subject and imperative for those who endeavor to follow this path. I cannot recommend Chuck Dunning's A Croix Oratory highly enough. If you know, you know. If you don't, listen to this podcast and find out. A Cult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to chamberofreflection.com, our membership website, who aids us in the cause of informed, authentic, and accessible interviews about Western esotericism. Thank you again. Because of your support, we're able to bring you recordings of this caliber and many more to come. The intro music is Awakening by Paul Avgerinos. And the outro music is In Search of the Philosopher's Stone by William Zeitler. Chuck Dunning, I want to welcome you back to the podcast. It's always a pleasure and an honor to have a chance to speak with you. And really, I'm tremendously excited to talk to you today about your new book, because it's very special to me, and I'm sure it's special to you and to many other people who will read it. It will become so. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's a real pleasure to be here, Greg. Thank you so much. And yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear that it's special to you. I mean, I kind of thought it was since you agreed to write the foreword for it, and I look forward to having a great conversation with you and Billy about it, and letting our readers know what it may have to offer them.
Just wanted to welcome you as well, Brother Dunning. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. It's always a real treat to be able to chat with you.
Billy, I enjoy getting to meet you now, and I know you've had a presence now with the podcast for a while, and it's been nice to hear your voice and the questions that you ask and how you stimulate conversation. I think you're a great addition, and I'm glad that Greg has been getting the help that you've been providing. So it's nice to meet you.
Thanks so much.
So today we're gathered here to discuss your new book, A Rose Croix Oratory, Rosicrucian Reflections and Resources from a Knight of the Eagle and Pelican by C.R. Dunning Jr. This book, I have to say, it holds a really special place for me. And before I ask you the first question, I just want to thank you again for allowing me to read it and write the foreword to it, because I felt like you did something extraordinary, and it was really, in many ways for me, important in the way that you kind of set the tone, defined things, the way you were able to approach issues that I found difficult, and just like overcome them like water almost. And it is just really, really touching in many ways. And I felt like every element that you included in the book, from your own personal reflections to the poetry, to the meditations, to the artwork that you chose to include, like it just all worked together so beautifully as a synthesis. It was just really amazing. So anyway, I'm going to stop blathering on about it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your very kind words. Thank you.
So just to kick things off here, because I know not everyone is as well versed in these topics as you are. What is Rosicrucianism, and how should we think of it in this day and age?
Yeah, those are two good questions, and you're going to get different answers from different people, and you'll get different answers from different people who are regarded as authorities in Rosicrucianism. So I just start with a caveat that anything that I say here today about Rosicrucianism or Freemasonry or really anything is based on my own perspective and my own experience. And so Rosicrucianism started as a mythopoetic movement in my way of understanding things. It began with the issue of three what are typically called Rosicrucian manifestos: the Fama Fraternitatis, the Confessio Fraternitatis, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. And those were in 1614, 1615, and 1616. And they told the story, the first two in particular, told the story of an order, the Order of the Rosy Cross, that was created by a brilliant young monk. Well, he was young when he left on his travels, at least, to tour through the ancient world and study with the sages there, and I should say, the Mediterranean world, the great centers of culture and learning that have existed for thousands of years. And he studied, among other things, Cabala. It was very clear in the Fama Fraternitatis that this is one of his studies. And the second manifesto builds on the story of his life and the order that he created when he returned by setting down some of the precepts that they would follow. Um, and then finally, the third manifesto, which is not really very manifesto-like. It's really more of a story. And if it's the same character, and many people regard the main character of Christian Rosenkreuz as the same character as CR or CRC from the Fama Fraternitatis, then we're now getting a story of him as an older man who has kind of become a little bit of a recluse, and he's living a very simple, primitive life, and he gets invited to the wedding of a king and a queen in a miraculous way. An angel appears to him and extends to him this invitation, and through a divine response to his prayerful request about whether he should go or not, he does go. And there's a great adventure that has lots of alchemical symbolism in it, and it generally is understood to be an allegorical tale of the great work of realizing a reintegration of his being, a greater level of wholeness, so that he can more consciously function as an instrument of the divine. Well, these three documents taken together just stimulated a huge outburst of interest within Europe within the decades following their release. And while there were lots of people interested in it, defenders claiming to know who the Rosicrucians were, attackers claiming to know who the Rosicrucians were, other people publishing their letters of inquiry and wishing to become members and so on, no authoritative figure ever really stepped forward to claim anything about these original documents until Johann Valentin Andrei came forward and said that the latter of the three was his creation, and that he had written it as a kind of what he used the word ludibrium, which can be translated in a lot of different ways. Some people have translated it as a farce. I think a better translation of that word in this case is probably a plaything, something that is entertaining but also has value, that we learn through play, for example. And so even things that are written in jest, have much truth to them. So if there was anything like an original Order of the Rosy Cross, perhaps it was something like the Tübingen Circle, a group of academics that Andre was part of, and that Christopher McIntosh has written quite a bit about. But even they don't seem to have really functioned as a kind of religious order, but we don't really know. And so what we're left with is these three documents just as at least the watershed of this great mythopoetic movement. And by that, I mean a cultural movement that grabs hold of people at the level of their deep imagination and stirs them, inspires them to think about great possibilities for their life and for culture and for history and society and everything. And that movement has manifested in many different ways over the years, but with the consistent presence of the Rosy Cross or a rose cross as a visual image connected with it. And on the other hand, these three founding documents as the kind of the literary foundation of the movement. And there's been all kinds of literature, organizations created, you name it. Any kind of artistic creation that you can think of, somebody has done something in the name of Rosicrucianism within that art. And so today, what we have inherited are many, many different threads. There's a great tapestry out there that we could refer to as Rosicrucianism. And wherever you look on that tapestry, kind of, that's what determines what you see and how you experience Rosicrucianism. And it's hard to really grasp the whole. In fact, I would say it's even really beyond our ability to grasp the whole of Rosicrucianism conceptually and intellectually. But what we have today are many organizations that identify as Rosicrucian, some of them exclusively Christian, others retaining some degree of Christian symbolism, and some completely distancing themselves from Christianity in the sense of not really working with Christian theology, for example, as a conceptual format for their work. So lots of intersections too with other Western esoteric currents, certainly with Freemasonry. We find great intersections with alchemy, there are Rosicrucian groups out there now that are even connecting strongly with neo-pagan. I wouldn't say traditions, but although I guess some neo-pagan groups are traditions at this point, they've been working long enough to have earned that title. So much Reconstructionism going on there. But I'm going on and on and on here, and I think my main point is it's so diverse that it's almost impossible to be able to clearly encapsulate what Rosicrucianism is.
Thank you. Yeah, you did a great job, I agree. It is a challenging question, so I appreciate that very much. And I know it's just sort of like an entree, like that, the mystery of it, and also the sort of allure of it. And the promise of regeneration, and
yes.
In a personal and public way is really, I think, has a great attraction for many people who I think find themselves to be like spiritual aspirants. So it makes sense.
I agree. And I think that that's probably the most consistent way of describing what the aims of Rosicrucianism are. And that's personal transformation, or transmutation, if you want to use the alchemical language, personal transformation. And then also, a sociological change, that society as a whole, there's a vision for society as a whole coming to a more developed, integrated, healthier form of being.
Chuck, I just wanted to, if you don't mind, dive into one of my favorite chapters in your book, and it's a term that we hear attached to the Rosicrucian movement a lot, and that's the great work, performing the great work. And unfortunately, this has become something of a bit of a catchphrase, I guess, or a prop that a lot of esotericists use. But I love the section in your book where you just sort of strip away kind of the smoke and the mirrors, and you really you get to grips with the great work in very practical terms, which you always do so well. And you define it as a practice. It's something where you really have to roll up your sleeves and do the work every single day. It's not this intellectualized, esoteric thing per se.
Right.
So if you didn't mind, I just wanted to read real quick your overview for the Rosicrucian great work from your book. And this is not just for people on the Rosicrucian path. I think this is exactly what Freemasonry and so many of the great spiritual traditions teach us as well. So here's how you lay it out. So number one, being consistently attentive to the present moment, both internally and externally. So the whole idea of mindfulness. Number two, practicing non-judgmental awareness. So this is an ethos, of course, that most of the great spiritual religions embrace. Developing empathy and compassion for other beings based on a deeper awareness and acceptance of our whole being. Number four, exercising virtue in our ordinary daily activities and relationships. This one, in my experience, is I think maybe one of my favorites, because this is why so much emphasis is placed on service, to our fellow human beings in Freemasonry and within, Christian Hermeticism, you name it. And developing a greater ability to fine-tune and sustain concentration, including mental quietness and stillness, and welcoming intuition, inspiration, and creativity directly into our consciousness. And finally, performing ritual that affirms and reinforces the previous points. So I just thought that was so beautifully expressed and so thoughtful, and just a real reminder, I guess, that the great work, this internal process of alchemy, working on a rough ashlar, to borrow a Masonic term, is the most important journey, I think, that we can really undertake. And it should remain front and center, I think, for anyone who's serious about spiritual development. And it's hard work. It's a lifelong practice, for sure.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more with us and just expand a little bit about your thoughts around this idea of the great work and its importance?
Yeah. So, the term great work is really borrowed from alchemy, and it's this idea of being able to, in materialist terms, it's the idea of being able to convert crude metals into gold. And then from there, the idea of being able to produce the philosopher's stone or the universal medicine, or, these different ways of kind of expressing what the goal of alchemy is, or a particular alchemist. But when we understand those allegorically for a psycho-spiritual journey, we're talking about an ordinary human being consciously recognizing at some level that there's more to this life, there's more to reality than what meets my eyes and my other senses. That there's something going on behind the scenes of all of this. And from that moment forward, if a person takes that sense of something else going on, that there's more to life than what seems apparent, if they take that seriously, then it becomes a kind of quest in which we're looking to gain understanding about this great mystery of our being. And along the way, one of the things that we can discover, and in fact is just repeatedly testified to over and over and over in different traditions around the world, so we begin to realize that kind of the key to understanding what's going on behind the veils of the reality is understanding what's going on behind the veils of ourself. And so if we're going to penetrate the veil of our own existence, if we're going to go past what I know as Chuck Dunning or what you know as Billy Hepper, if we're going to try to get past that to what's deeper there, then it does require some work. And so the great work, there's the word work is very literal.
Yeah.
It's not just allegorical for some kind of thing that happens to you. It's something you have to participate in willingly. And so you begin to pay attention internally, and you begin to recognize what it is about you that is more or less illusory. And in order to do these things, you have to develop different capacities of your consciousness. And those 7 points that you laid out there that I have in my book about what the great work, what it actually requires of us, those are the kinds of things that we need to be doing with our consciousness in order to be able to distinguish where we are in terms of more or less illusion and therefore more or less truth directly encountered. And so the great work is, at the beginning, is just that process of really trying to dig into the deeper hidden truth within oneself. And at some point, if we are devoted and I don't mean devout in a particularly religious way, but devout in the sense of really thoroughly committed to this, that it is in a way a kind of romance for us that we can't let go of, then there's a response that happens that is for all appearances external to us. And we can experience that response in lots of different ways. Amazing synchronicities can happen. People can walk into our lives saying exactly what we need to hear in that moment, which is a kind of synchronicity. And then also things can unfold within us, and we suddenly realize something or experience something. There are all kinds of stories about people having these kind of road to Damascus experiences, like the Apostle Paul talked about, and anybody who has really been in these circles of mystical devotion for any length of time knows what this is like. And there are lots of different ways these experiences can happen and can be described, but essentially something happens within one's own consciousness that makes it absolutely absurd to deny that you've been connected with something beyond your own personal being. And it's happened within you, not just externally, but it's happened within you. Right. Sometimes it's both, you get the external and the internal, but nonetheless, so there's that aspect of the great work. But then what do you do with that? Kind of a universal part of that, at least within the Rosicrucian tradition, is that's a realization of your oneness with the divine, that you are the divine. And so, but what do you do with that? Is that it? Do you just walk around for the rest of your life then going, okay, well, I'm the divine. How about that? Where's my next hamburger coming from? That's an important question. And for some people, what they do with it is they kind of trip out on it. At least a lot of people do that. In fact, they kind of trip out on it for a while. It's like, and I can honestly say that I know what that's like, to get a little ego inflation in the wake of an experience like that, and to say, wow, well, I must be a really special human being because I had this experience. But if you continue to pay attention to yourself, well, you find out, no, not really. I'm still the same ego that I was before, or at least my new ego sure has a lot of the pieces of the old ego left in it. And so then it becomes, okay, if I'm going to have integrity, if I'm going to live this truth that I have discovered, or that has been imparted upon me, or that I've been graced with, however you want to say it. If I'm going to live that truth, then that means I've got more changing to do. And it also means I just can't keep it within myself, because if I'm divine, so are you. And so is everybody else. And in fact, so is everything else. And how can I make that real? How can I realize that more completely, more fully? And how can I become an instrument of that in this world? And then the great work becomes something other than just a transformation of myself. It becomes participation in the transformation of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that I really like about Freemasonry, is that it gives you some of these tools to deal with the problems of ego that arise from these, participating in the great work, because it grounds you in this attitude of service and this attitude of serving your brethren. And it also emphasizes the social aspects as well. So it gives you that kind of balance between the esoteric and the exoteric.
Yeah.
But, thank you very much for that answer.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with that. Thanks. That was a great exchange. Sort of dovetailing with this idea of the great work, I want to quote from your book here also. And if I'm not mistaken, this may be the section immediately preceding the one that we were just discussing. Quote, "If there is nothing more important than love, God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. In human terms, love is the desire for, experience of, and expression of the divine. Since all things are united in God's presence, everything we do is in some ways driven by love, an expression of love, and an experience of love, whether it be the love of God, nature, truth, others, or self. Even the things we regard as evil can be understood as twisted, distorted, often extremely one-sided manifestations of love. There is nothing more important than love, although there is also nothing more mysterious. Love, like all things divine, is not only immediately present, but also beyond our ability to fully conceptualize." So we close these 8 points by considering that love in various forms is at once the motivation for the great work, the means of the great work, and the effect of the great work. Love is the great work. And I'm just wondering maybe what more can be said about that, if anything.
So recently I did a video essay called A Closer Look at Non-Dual Love. And one of the reasons that I decided to do that essay was basically a response to your question. And that is that I know that thinking about love in that way can be really challenging. It can be offensive to some people, and understandably so, that, you know, we look around and we see all kinds of pettiness and abusiveness and neglect. And I mean, human beings can be really terrible to each other. And the natural world is obviously not designed with our comfort in mind. And so living in a world like this, where all of these frankly terrible things happen, whether at the hands of other human beings or not, how can anybody look at all of that and say, oh, that's love too? I mean, it borders on making love a meaningless, trite, nothingness, you know? And it also flies in the face of our attachment to love as being this really beautiful, touching, sweet, cozy, passionate, you know, all of those things in love that we most want, right? How can I continue to use the word love for those wonderful things if I'm also saying that all of these other horrible things are love too? And so I understand that a lot of people are just going to reject this notion outright. It's just not going to make sense to them. They're not going to find any value in that. That would, you know, it would just be an affront to their experience and orientation to being. And yet, you know, one of the things that I try to do is point to examples. And, you know, it wasn't until after I discovered this non-duality of love in my own way, it wasn't until after that I found out that Giordano Bruno also had this idea and talked about how every human act that you see as an act of evil, or everything that you see some creature doing that we would judge as an act of evil, is actually motivated by something they love. So we see terrorists setting off bombs in public places and destroying the lives of people who are non-combatants, and we say that's just nothing but pure evil. A lot of us feel that way, and yet, why does the terrorist do that? The terrorist does that because the terrorists love their movement. They love what it is their movement represents to them. And in some ways, that may be a very sick or twisted thing. But in other ways, that doesn't mean that it's not genuine, that their love of country, their love of culture, their love of their people, their love of their family who may have been, in their own minds, unjustly oppressed or even destroyed, has motivated all of this. And so it can be a painful thing to do, but I think we need to be willing to let go of our automatic categorization of everything into the two boxes of either good or evil, and recognize that there's something that transcends that. Even in the Holy Bible, we find that we're repeatedly shown that evil doesn't exist outside of God's will, that the divine actually allows for the possibility of evil, that if we're going to have true freedom, then we've got to have the potential for evil, right? And so God transcends good and evil as we understand it. Then it follows. It's just a logical conclusion. And so then anything that we think of as ultimately divine must at some level also transcend these dualities of good and evil and right and wrong, pleasant and unpleasant, comfortable and uncomfortable. And for me, the most significant one of those, the most significant aspect of the divine and of those things that transcend these dualities is love. And the reason for that is because it is the most direct and impactful way that human beings seem to be able to relate to something bigger and more important than themselves. Thomas Aquinas talked a lot about love in his theology, and how much more important love is than the intellect. We can never really know God in an intellectual, conceptual way, but we can love God nonetheless. I can never really know the people that I connect with, and everybody, even myself, is a mystery to me at some level, but I can still love myself, the people that I connect with. And that loving, that is really a superior faculty then to intellect. And so being able to embrace that and let the intellect kind of surrender to this possibility that something transcends all the dichotomies and dualities and oppositions that intellect thrives within. That's just an important move, and it is a necessary move for the fullest realization of the unity that mystics all across the world are telling us is the essential truth of reality.
If I could just interject, sorry. I just wanted to say I love that you devoted this entire chapter in your book to virtue of love, Chuck, and how it kind of underpins and kind of forms the central teachings of Freemasonry as well. I know I keep bringing it back to Freemasonry, but I love talking about the craft. But you make this very good argument that love is perhaps the most important thing that Masonry can teach us. And I don't think we hear enough about love in our lodges. And I think many guys out there might have, like you said, a very one-dimensional idea of what love is or isn't. So I really wanted to say kudos to you for highlighting that. And as well, the most successful lodges that I know of are the ones that are the most supportive and loving. The atmosphere is not one of competition. There's this sort of loving, fatherly gentleness there, and it creates this natural space where I think men can begin to let go of some of their barriers, and they can let their philosophical and contemplative side come out a little bit. And we don't have many places, unfortunately, in today's world where men can do that. So I think if we can learn to sort of promote this idea of the virtue of love, like you have so beautifully, I think it's just going to benefit and strengthen the craft so much. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Billy. I'll add one little comment to that observation. And that is, a lot of us, in being enculturated as males, we've been kind of taught that love is a word that we just shouldn't be using. And we shouldn't even really be thinking in terms of love very often. And then we walk into a Masonic lodge, and it's one of the first things. I mean, our principal tenets start with brotherly love. And, the theological virtues are shown typically associated with with Jacob's ladder. And at the top of that ladder, presumably the most divine level of that ladder is charity, caritas, agape, that universal love, right? And the working tool of a master Mason is an instrument of brotherly love. And so it's like, if you're paying attention, it's right there.
It's right
you
there.
Don't have to dig. You don't have to dig for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Chuck, I just wanted to jump to another topic, if you don't mind. Kind of what I noticed at the very center of Rosicrucian teachings, if you go back and you look at the very early kind of source documents, there always seems to be this theme of healing, yes, as well as love. Rosicrucians are to go out into the world sort of anonymously and, in a very hands-on way, become a healer, and you actually provide some exercises in your book to sort of develop this kind of healing energy, which is great. My question is, are we to, I guess, understand this task literally, do you think? Like we don't hear very much nowadays about miraculous sort of healing movements like we used to, the saints and that sort of thing. Have you witnessed any cases where, groups or individuals have been able to sort of harness their energy for therapeutic and healing purposes? And do you think this is still sort of the core mission of the Rosicrucian movement?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is definitely an indispensable aspect. I think the understanding of healing within Rosicrucianism is broader than just the kind of a person who has some sort of an affliction or an illness or something like that being miraculously cured. Those things happen. I've been connected with groups that work with that sort of thing. And so, I know that those things happen, but this broader way of understanding healing really kind of goes, there's a strong connection in Cabala, where they talk about the tikkun hanefesh and tikkun ha'olam, which is the healing of the soul and the healing of the world, or the reintegration of the soul and the reintegration of the world, putting things back together. And for me and for many Rosicrucians, that's the understanding of healing, is that when we say that that's the only thing that we really profess, what we're talking about across the board, the entire scope of healing is everything from, that really physical change for an individual human being who is suffering in some way, all the way through every kind of making things whole and harmonious all the way, like all the way to the oneness of everything. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
And different groups can focus on different specialties within those, within that scope.
Mm-hmm.
Some may actually really focus on physical healing work. Others may focus on psychological and spiritual healing for individuals. Others may focus on social kind of goals. And then others have, this grander sense of a kind of collective realization of oneness that hopefully humanity will someday realize. You'll find all of those things within the scope of Rosicrucianism.
Right. Yeah, I love that, and it really links up with the idea in the ancient world and within the early church of justice. Restoring order, restoring balance to God's creation.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right on the money there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like for people who don't understand this topic, we might be like kind of dancing around it a little bit. So what can be said about the relationship, if any, between what we might think of as more straightforward, if there is such a thing, Rosicrucianism and Masonic Rosicrucianism? Is that even a valid distinction? And it maybe this is not even important to discuss, but I feel like there are differences, but they may not be as anything more than superficial.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure that I know what straightforward Rosicrucianism is, Greg.
Fair enough. I think that's fair.
I think there are a lot of people out there trying to tell us what it is. But it's like the old saw of all the different people examining different parts of the elephant and coming up with different explanations for what the elephant is. I think Masonic Rosicrucianism does kind of tend to have a distinct flavor, though, to it, and compared to other forms of Rosicrucianism. And there are other forms of Rosicrucianism that don't claim to be Masonic that have a very Masonic flavor to them as well. We've probably the most widely known Rosicrucian organization existing today is Ancient Mystic Order Rosicrucis, AMORC, and they follow a system of degrees that's essentially a Masonic system of degrees, although they've stripped away all of the most of the Masonic elements of it. And there are other examples. They're not the only one. There are plenty of other examples where that's the case. But I think one of the things that distinguishes this kind of Masonic Rosicrucianism, for one thing, is this idea of a system of grades or degrees, this apprenticeship kind of approach. Now, you could look at alchemy and say they had an apprenticeship kind of approach to alchemy too, but in terms of a set of degrees that people follow to go through to advance and learn lessons and develop abilities and skills and so on, that seems to be kind of a fairly unique Masonic hallmark. Anytime we see orders or groups with elaborate sets of degrees, they're typically reflecting Masonry in some way or another. Those sorts of things just weren't very common prior to Masonry's rise in the 18th century. But as soon as Masonry caught hold, other groups started kind of following the pattern, the Masonic pattern. Another thing that I think is kind of typical of Masonic Rosicrucian groups is the connection with chivalry. That seems to be really common. So we've got these two different major allegorical themes, right? One is is building, constructing, which we follow through a set of degrees, and the other is this idea of knighthood and everything that goes with it. And sometimes those two things can be hard to kind of see married up with each other. But of course, if you're a Freemason and you've gone through the Scottish Rite, or you've gone into the commandery of the York Rite, or some of the other appendant bodies that have knighthood degrees, then it's much easier probably for you to relate to this than it would be many other people who've not worked with these ideas. So I think those are two of the things that are kind of really prevalent within a Masonic context. I wouldn't put fraternalism in there, because I think fraternalism is something that has had, a longstanding place in human history, and we don't see that as being unique. I don't see that as being unique to Freemasonry. Religious orders have existed for millennia, and so in some ways, Freemasonry kind of has built on what religious orders were doing in terms of fraternalism and the bonds that are built between individuals within religious orders. We find that then something that we have tried to incorporate into our experience as Freemasons. Yeah, so I think kind of those are the things that come to mind for me, but I know you've got some thoughts on it, Greg. What do you see as being kind of unique to Masonic Rosicrucianism?
Oh, thank you. I'm honored you'd even ask me. For me, I feel like Masonic Rosicrucianism, and this is, I'm just for the sake of full disclosure, I'm not a Masonic Rosicrucian. Although I did receive the 18th degree in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, Scottish Rite. So with that said, I feel that with Masonic Rosicrucianism, there is much more of an emphasis on the ritual and the symbols and the chivalric aspect that you mentioned. Certainly. But I also felt like along with that comes, and I don't know if this is everybody's experience or just mine, or just maybe just people in the northern jurisdiction, but that I felt like along with the ritual and the chivalric aspect came, and I don't know how to say this, so I'm going to try to be as delicate with my words as I can, because I'm often like a bull in a china shop. I would say that you get an aspect of what really has the flavor of very exoteric religiosity, almost dogmatically so.
Yeah.
And that for me was confusing, because I felt like you had these things were happening simultaneously. They were literally occupying the same moment in time and the same exact location and space. And I was like, wow, that is fascinating. So to me, I don't get any of that in non-Masonic Rosicrucianism. Like non-Masonic Rosicrucianism, I get mostly what I expect, except that there's also this, and again, try to be delicate with my language here, a practical understanding of human sexuality and its relationship to esoteric theory and practice that I'm just not getting at all in Masonic Rosicrucianism, with good reason. It's understandable.
Yeah, I'd say those are fair observations. I'd also say some of that probably varies from one location to another. in terms, just specifically in terms of the 18th degree and the Scottish Rite and the local atmosphere. So yeah, I definitely get that. I think that Masonic, what we see in terms of Masonic forms of Rosicrucianism today, which I would include the 18th degree with that, as well as the Societas Rosicruciana. What we see there, in large part, is an emphasis on learning the language of ritual, the movements of ritual, particularly for the purpose of initiation or advancing through grades, and being able to perform that really, really, really well, but not really having a lot of connection with different faculties of consciousness and understanding, different ways to plug into ritual, or any practice then that supports ritual outside of ritual, like any kind of meditative practices or so on. Those seem to be highly uncommon. There may be some colleges in fact, I know of at least one college of Societas Rosicruciana in which members are encouraged to practice certain forms of meditation and energy work outside of their meetings. But on the whole, I would agree that most forms of Masonic Rosicrucianism, their practice, the discipline practice, seems to be fairly external rather than internal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I just had a final one, maybe, Chuck, if I may. I know you've been hard at work. You've developed some very successful courses now for the Scottish Rite called the Academy of Reflection. And these are sort of exercises developed specifically for Scottish Rite Masons, I understand. And from what I hear, they've just been absolutely fantastic. Do you have any plans to maybe fold some of the materials in from your new book, or maybe start a similar online academy with more of a Rosicrucian focus, something that might appeal to folks who might consider themselves to be in the esoteric Christian path? I know it's kind of a niche audience, but I think there's definitely a market there.
No, I don't have any plans to create any other new organizations. I'm not particularly interested in or gifted at organizational stuff, although sometimes I feel like, that's something that I need to do in order to serve, right?
Yeah.
But no, I'm not. If somebody else wants to create an organization that takes and uses this material that I have provided in some way, I'd be glad to serve as an advisor or a consultant or a resource of some kind. But I'm not interested in creating or running an organization myself.
Yeah, fair enough. You've done the groundwork. You've put in the hard work. So that's great. Can you share any new projects on your horizon? What you've been working on?
So what I'm experiencing now in terms of like answering the call is moving more toward providing workshops and retreats rather than doing lectures. So Masonic education has been very heavily lecture oriented for a long time now. Those folks that are interested in leadership skills are kind of ahead of the game in this respect in Masonic education, because they're doing some more kind of workshopy kind of things, but even there's room for improvement. We need more workshops and retreats in Masonry that are focused on these deeper spiritual, psychological, mystical potentials of our tradition. Yeah. And so I'm trying to provide more of that sort of thing.
That's great. I think as this book becomes more widely disseminated, you're going to be a busy guy. I know I think even Martinist temples, Rosicrucian lodges, I could see you definitely being in demand for sure.
Well, I'm happy to help just about any group that would be interested in learning more about the kinds of things that I'm offering.
That's great.
Chuck, on behalf of Billy and myself and all the listeners, I just want to take a moment to thank you again for taking the time to speak to us about your wonderful book and really sharing some of the most profound wisdom with us that I think has ever graced this podcast. So I am really excited about the book, about this interview, about what you say and or what you're doing. And I know I'm not alone in that. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Billy. I really enjoyed our conversation here today, and um, I as I said at the beginning, I hope this book is useful. That captures it all.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that, Chuck. It's been an absolute pleasure to have a chance to speak with you today. Your book made me excited about the Scottish Rite again. It had me going back to my old degree books. So thank you for that. I just think, like I said, the time is right for this book. So thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us and coming onto the show. I'm sure we're going to have you back again soon.
Thanks, Billy. I appreciate that. And I hope other Scottish Rite members find it valuable to them, and non-Masons too. And anytime I can have an opportunity to speak with either or both of you guys is going to be a welcome occasion.
Thank you again, brother.
Yeah, thanks so much.
In the Chamber of Reflection and at our Patreon, Billy and I continue the interview with Chuck Dunning Jr., where we continue our exploration of the virtues of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry, including chivalry and knighthood, Christian Cabala, the power of prayer beads, effects of angelic ritual, compassion as a method to overcome the illusion of separation, and much, much more. Join us for that compelling conversation. And I'd like to remind you that although you're able to listen to this podcast at no charge, it costs time and money to create. We ask you to support our efforts in the creation of future podcasts by joining the membership section at chamberofreflection.com or subscribing via Patreon at patreon.com/occultofpersonality. As always, if you're already supporting the show or have done so in the past, my heartfelt thanks, and I salute you. And please remember, we're in the midst of our Meditations on the Tarot study circle that is open to all Chamber of Reflection paid members. Later in April, we're meeting to discuss death, and you should join us. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.